betrayed you during your most vulnerable moment. Olivia sat alone in her car, the dim glow from the dashboard painting faint shadows across her tear-streaked face. Her fingers trembled as they toyed with her wedding ring, twisting it back and forth, a nervous habit she hadn't realized she'd formed. She stared out through the windshield, her gaze unfocused, her mind replaying the moment that shattered her heart just hours ago. She had followed Ryan tonight, her instincts gnawing at her, urging her to confirm the suspicions she had tried so hard to push away. And there he was, sitting across from a younger woman in a booth at their favorite restaurant, the place they'd celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and even their pregnancy news. The laughter spilling from their table felt like a slap. Ryan leaned in close, whispering something that made the woman giggle, her hand lightly brushing his. It wasn't just a dinner. It wasn't innocent. Olivia's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the memory replayed. She had felt frozen in that moment, unable to breathe, unable to look away. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst, each beat echoing with betrayal. She had wanted to storm in, demand answers, scream at him, at her, at the universe for letting this happen. But instead, she had turned away, her chest heavy with a pain so deep it threatened to swallow her whole. Now, sitting in the stillness of the car, the quiet was almost unbearable. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, but the tears kept coming. Her hand fell to her growing belly and she closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. "It's not just about me anymore," she whispered to herself. "I have to think about you now." Her other hand instinctively cradled her stomach, a protective gesture that made her heartbreak feel sharper, more unbearable. After what felt like hours, she finally started the car and drove home. The memory of how it all began still played vividly in Olivia's mind. Like scenes from a favorite movie, she couldn't bring herself to stop watching, even when it hurt. Back then, their love story had felt effortless, like something written in the stars. She could still remember the exact moment she met Ryan, her heart skipping a beat as he smiled at her from across the room at the university fundraiser. She hadn't even wanted to attend that night, but her roommate had convinced her to go, insisting she needed to network and have a little fun. Olivia had stood awkwardly near the refreshment table, nursing a glass of lemonade and trying to look busy. And then Ryan appeared, his tie slightly askew, and an easy grin on his face as he grabbed a plate of hors d'oeuvres. "Not much of a party, huh?" he said, nodding toward the sparse crowd of students milling around. His voice was warm, friendly, and completely disarming. Olivia looked up, surprised that someone was talking to her. "Yeah, not exactly the social event of the year," she replied, smiling shyly. "I'm Ryan," he said, extending his hand. "Olivia," she said, shaking it. His grip was firm but not overbearing, and for some reason, that small detail stuck with her. They spent the rest of the evening talking, laughing about how neither of them really wanted to be there and swapping stories about their lives. He told her about his love for basketball and how he worked part-time at the campus library to save for law school. She told him about her passion for art history and how she dreamed of one day curating exhibits at a big city museum. "What's your dream exhibit?" he had asked, leaning against the wall, his eyes genuinely curious. She had hesitated, feeling a little silly. "It's kind of niche," she admitted, "but I'd love to put together something about how everyday objects tell stories, like a simple tea set or a pair of old shoes. They can say so much about the lives of the people who own them." Ryan had smiled, and it wasn't a patronizing smile, but one that made her feel like he really understood. "That's not silly," he said. "That's fascinating. You'd be amazing at that." It was a small moment, but it stuck with her, and from then on, Ryan was everywhere in her life. They went on their first date a week later, a simple coffee date at a small cafe just off campus, the kind of place with wobbly tables and mismatched chairs, where the barista always seemed a little grumpy, but made the best cappuccinos Olivia had ever tasted. "Okay, but seriously," Ryan said, "if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?" "That's easy. Pizza," Olivia said, not missing a beat. "You can put anything on it, so it's versatile, and it's delicious." Ryan laughed, shaking his head. "That's cheating. The toppings can't change." "Then I guess I'd starve," she said with a dramatic shrug, and they both burst out laughing. Those early days were filled with moments like that, effortless, full of laughter and connection. They spent late nights walking through the campus gardens, talking about everything and nothing. He made her feel like she was the only person in the world who mattered, like her dreams were worth chasing. When Ryan proposed 3 years later, it was under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights he'd strung up in her parents' backyard. It was a warm summer evening, the kind where the air felt thick with possibility. He'd gotten down on one knee, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the small velvet box. "Olivia," he began, his voice steady despite the nervous energy in his eyes, "you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You've made my life brighter, better, and full of meaning. I can't imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me?" She had cried, of course, tears streaming down her face as she nodded furiously. "Yes," she managed through her tears. "Yes, Ryan, of course." The guest they'd hidden away in the house poured out, cheering as Ryan slid the ring onto her finger. It had been one of those picture-perfect moments she thought only happened in movies. They danced under the lights that night, barefoot and giddy with excitement, dreaming aloud about the life they would build together. Those memories had once been a source of comfort, a reminder of how strong their bond had been. But now, as Olivia sat alone in the quiet of their home, those same memories felt like sharp-edged reminders of what she had lost, of how far they had drifted from the couple who had once danced barefoot under the stars. Their first apartment was small, a little run down, and perfect in all the ways that mattered. Olivia still remembered the way Ryan carried her over the threshold on the day they moved in, laughing as he bumped her head lightly against the doorframe. "Sorry," he said, grinning as he set her down. "Not exactly the grand entry I had planned." "It's fine," she said, brushing dust off her jeans as she looked around the empty space. "It's ours, isn't it? That's all that matters." They spent that first night on a mattress on the floor, eating takeout straight from the containers because they hadn't unpacked any dishes yet. Olivia had laughed so hard when Ryan accidentally spilled soy sauce on the carpet that her sides ached. "Guess we'll have to invest in a rug sooner than we thought," she teased, and he leaned over to kiss her, his lips tasting faintly of sesame chicken. Over the weeks that followed, they made the space their own, painting the walls a soft yellow in the living room and hanging mismatched curtains that Olivia found on clearance. They spent hours rearranging furniture they'd gotten secondhand, debating where the couch should go until Ryan finally threw up his hands and said, "You pick. You're better at this than I am." Late one evening, as they unpacked the last box, their favorite song came on the radio. Ryan stood up, brushing his hands on his jeans, and extended a hand to her. "May I have this dance?" "Here?" she asked, raising an eyebrow but already smiling. "Right here," he said, pulling her to her feet. They danced barefoot on the scuffed hardwood floor, the light from a single lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. Olivia rested her head on his chest, swaying to the music, and in that moment, everything felt simple and perfect. Their life wasn't without challenges, of course. There were late nights when Ryan came home exhausted from work. Olivia would meet him at the door with a warm hug, pressing a cup of tea into his hands as he vented about a difficult client or a project gone wrong. "You've got this," she would say, her voice steady and sure. "You always do." And then there were the moments when it was her turn to lean on him. When she didn't get the promotion she'd worked so hard for, Ryan held her as she cried, stroking her hair and whispering, "They don't know what they're missing. You're incredible, Liv. Don't let this stop you." They were a team, balancing each other in ways that felt natural, effortless. For every setback, there was a victory, small triumphs that they celebrated together, like finding the perfect throw pillows for the couch, or finally saving enough money to replace the ancient microwave that sparked whenever it was used. Then came the moment that changed everything. Olivia had been feeling off for days, tired, a little queasy, her emotions swinging wildly from one extreme to another. At first, she blamed it on stress, but then she realized her period was late. Sitting in the bathroom, staring at the pregnancy test in her hands, she felt a mix of emotions so overwhelming it left her breathless: excitement, fear, joy, uncertainty. When Ryan came home that evening, she could barely contain herself. "I need to show you something," she blurted, grabbing his hand and dragging him to the kitchen. "Okay," he said, laughing. "What's the rush?" She handed him the test, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, he just stared at it, his brow furrowing as he processed what it meant. Then his face broke into the widest grin she'd ever seen. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "We're having a baby." Ryan swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. kitchen. "We're having a baby," he repeated, laughing as if he couldn't believe it. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation and excitement. Olivia threw herself into creating the perfect nursery, picking out soft pastel paints and tiny clothes that made her heart swell just looking at them. Ryan teased her for agonizing over which crib to buy, but he was just as involved, assembling furniture late into the night and proudly showing her his handiwork. One evening, as they folded baby clothes together, Olivia held up a tiny onesie and smiled. "Can you believe someone this small is going to change our whole world?" Ryan looked at her, his eyes soft. "I don't know how we got so lucky," he said quietly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I know one thing, you're going to be the best mom." Her heart swelled, and she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. They were building a future together, one filled with love, laughter, and the promise of something extraordinary. But what Olivia didn't know, that things were about to change. As Ryan's career began to take off, so did the distance between them. At first, Olivia didn't think much of it. Promotions came with added responsibility, and she understood the pressure he was under. "Just a few more late nights," he had said once, kissing her on the forehead as he grabbed his briefcase. "It's all for us, you know." She had believed him. After all, Ryan had always been ambitious, and his drive was one of the things she loved about him. But as the months wore on, those few more late nights stretched into a pattern she couldn't ignore. Dinners she had carefully prepared went cold on the table, candles burning down to stubs as she sat alone, waiting. When he finally came home, he would apologize briefly, his tone distracted, before retreating to his laptop or phone. "It's just work," he'd say, brushing off her concern when she tried to talk about it. "You know how demanding things are right now." At first, she tried to be understanding. She didn't want to be the clingy wife, the one who couldn't support her husband's success. But the little things started to add up. There was the receipt she found crumpled in his coat pocket for an expensive necklace from a boutique downtown. It had caught her attention immediately because Ryan had always been thoughtful with gifts, but she couldn't recall receiving anything like it. She'd turned it over in her hands, her stomach twisting. "Hey," she'd said casually that evening, holding the receipt as he sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "What's this for?" Ryan glanced up, his eyes flicking to the paper before settling back on his screen. "Oh, that? It's nothing," he said with a dismissive wave. "A gift for a client. You know how it is." "For a client?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Since when do you buy jewelry for work?" "It's just a gesture," he replied, his tone clipped. "Don't overthink it, Liv." She had let it go, but the uneasy feeling lingered, gnawing at her. Little moments like that began to pile up, his phone buzzing late at night with messages he didn't bother to explain, the way he seemed to keep it close to him at all times now, even taking it with him to the bathroom. When she'd glance over, she'd catch him smiling at the screen, a soft, private expression that made her chest tighten. "Who's that?" she asked once, trying to sound casual. "Just work stuff," he said, quickly locking the screen and setting the phone face down on the table. "You seem pretty happy about work these days," she said, forcing a small laugh, but he didn't respond, his attention already elsewhere. The warmth that had once filled their relationship felt like it was slipping through her fingers, replaced by a cold distance she didn't know how to bridge. She tried to reconnect, planning date nights and making his favorite meals, but he always had an excuse. Her suspicions reached their peak one Friday evening. Ryan had promised to be home early. She spent hours preparing a special dinner, even setting the table with their best plates and lighting the candles he'd bought for their anniversary. She'd been so hopeful, convinced that a quiet evening together could rekindle the closeness they'd once shared. But when 7 turned into 8 and then 9, she couldn't sit still any longer. She called him, but it went straight to voicemail. She sent a text, her fingers shaking. "Are you okay?" His reply came almost an hour later. "Sorry, got caught up at work, don't wait up." But Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She walked into their bedroom, her eyes landing on his briefcase sitting by the door. She hesitated before opening it, her heart pounding, as if she already knew she wouldn't like what she'd find. Inside, she saw a printed itinerary for a work conference he'd never mentioned, scheduled for the following weekend. The destination wasn't far, but what caught her attention was the handwritten note, scribbled in the margin. "Make sure Emily has everything she needs for the trip. Emily." She stared at the name, her mind racing. She didn't know an Emily from Ryan's office, but she had heard him mention the name once or twice recently, always in passing. She closed the briefcase carefully, her hands trembling, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Later that night, she heard him come home. He slipped into bed beside her without a word, his phone buzzing softly as he checked it one last time before setting it on the nightstand. Olivia lay there in the dark, her back to him, her eyes wide open. Her mind was screaming with questions she didn't know how to ask, her heart breaking under the weight of what she was beginning to suspect. She wanted to believe it wasn't what it seemed. She wanted to believe that the man she had loved so deeply, the man she had trusted with her heart and her future, wasn't capable of betraying her. But as she lay there, listening to his even breathing, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that the life they had built was beginning to crack, and she had no idea how to stop it from falling apart. One day, the unease had become too much to bear. Olivia had spent hours pacing the house, her mind racing with every possibility, and then, without fully deciding to, she found herself grabbing her keys and stepping out into the cool night air. She hadn't planned this, not really. It was instinct that had led her here, following Ryan after another one of his vague excuses about a late meeting. She told herself it was just to ease the nagging voice in her head, the one that whispered things she didn't want to believe. Her heart sank when she saw him pull into the small restaurant parking lot, the one they used to go to for date nights. She parked a few spaces away, her pulse racing as she watched him step out of his car. He smoothed his jacket, checked his phone, and then there she was. A younger woman dressed effortlessly in a sleek dress, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, approached Ryan with a smile that made Olivia's stomach twist. He returned the smile, the easy, familiar one that used to be hers. Olivia's breath caught as she watched him lean down slightly, his hand brushing the woman's back as they walked inside together. She sat frozen in her car, unable to move, unable to breathe. The glass of the windshield seemed like a barrier between her and the truth unraveling in front of her. Her mind raced, searching for another explanation. Maybe it really was a work dinner, maybe it was nothing. But deep down, she knew. She'd known for weeks, maybe longer, but seeing it, seeing him, it was like someone had ripped the ground out from beneath her. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door handle, every part of her screaming to march inside, to demand answers, to make a scene that would put an end to the lies. But she didn't. Her fingers hesitated, then withdrew, and she let the door fall shut. Confronting him now wouldn't fix anything, she realized. Not like this. Instead, she sat there in silence, watching as the lights inside the restaurant cast a warm glow over their table near the window. Ryan laughed at something the woman said, his head tilting slightly as he leaned closer. Olivia swallowed hard, her throat tight. The man she thought she knew, the man she'd shared a life with, felt like a stranger. Her heart ached, but even more than that, it burned. She didn't know how long she sat there before she finally started the car and drove home. The house was quiet when she walked in, the kind of quiet that felt hollow, like the walls themselves were aware of what had just happened. She set her purse down on the counter, her movements slow and deliberate, as though rushing would make the pain hit harder. The ultrasound photo on the fridge caught her eye, the little black and white image she had stared at every morning with a mix of wonder and hope. She walked over to it, her fingers brushing lightly over the edges of the picture. Her reflection stared back at her from the shiny surface of the fridge, puffy eyes, tear-streaked cheeks, and an expression she barely recognized. She wanted to crumble right there, let the weight of the betrayal pull her to the floor. But then her hand dropped to her belly, and she felt the faint flutter of movement, a reminder of the life growing inside her. It wasn't just about her anymore. Her fingers dropped the photo, and something inside her shifted. The despair in her chest began to harden into something else, determination. It wasn't an instant transformation. As she moved through the house, her steps led her to the nursery. It was still a work in progress, walls painted a soft gray, a crib half assembled in the corner, a stack of unopened baby books on the dresser. She sat on the edge of the rocking chair, her hands trembling as she picked up a tiny baby blanket she had folded just days ago. She pressed it to her face, inhaling the faint scent of lavender fabric softener. The tears came again unbidden as she she held the blanket close. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You deserve so much better than this." Her fingers tightened around the blanket, her breaths coming faster. She looked around the room at the small, unfinished signs of the life she was preparing to welcome. Without thinking, she moved to the living room, her gaze landing on the shelf, lined with photo albums. The memories that once brought her joy now felt like ghosts, mocking her. She picked up the first album, the one filled with pictures from their wedding, the smiling faces, the vows exchanged, the promises made. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, but her resolve didn't waver. One by one, she packed the albums away in a box, her movements steady despite the tears that streaked her cheeks. It wasn't an act of erasure, it was an act of survival. She needed space to breathe, to think, to figure out her next steps. Ryan had made his choices, and now she would make hers. When the last album was packed, she sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. The room felt heavier now, the weight of her decision settling in. She stood, brushing the tears from her face. There was no room for despair, not now. She had a plan to make, a life to protect, and no matter how much it hurt, she wouldn't let Ryan's betrayal define her story. This was just the beginning. Olivia sat at the small desk in the corner of her bedroom, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the room. The quiet hum of the baby monitor on the nightstand filled the silence as she stared at her laptop screen. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, before she took a deep breath and clicked Save on the folder she'd created. The folder was labeled Ryan Evidence. Her heart ached with every file she added, photos, screenshots of messages she'd discreetly forwarded to herself, copies of receipts she'd found tucked away in his briefcase. Each piece was a painful reminder of what he had done, but Olivia forced herself to focus. She needed this, not for revenge, but for protection, for herself, for her baby. She glanced at the photo of them on her desk, picture from happier times. They were laughing, arms around each other, the world at their feet. She turned it face down, unable to bear the sight. That version of Ryan didn't exist anymore, if he ever had. Her preparations had started the night she followed him to the restaurant. After returning home, she'd stayed up until dawn, her mind racing. By morning, she had made a decision. If Ryan thought he could keep living a double life, she would show him he was wrong. But she wouldn't confront him, not yet. Confrontation was too easy, too predictable. She needed a plan. The next day, she bought a small camera online, one that could be hidden in her purse. When it arrived, she tested it nervously, fumbling with the settings until she got it right. The first time she used it was outside Ryan's office. She parked across the street, the camera angled just enough to capture him leaving the building. When Emily appeared moments later, her hand brushing his arm as they walked to his car, Olivia's heart sank. But she didn't cry. Not this time. "Stay focused," she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "You can't afford to fall apart." She followed them to another restaurant, snapping pictures from her car as they laughed over dinner. The betrayal stung, but she forced herself to see it for what it was, evidence. She didn't need to justify her actions anymore. She knew the truth, and now she was making sure others would too. Over the next few weeks, Olivia started consulting with a lawyer. The office was small and quiet, the walls lined with shelves of thick legal books. The lawyer, a woman in her late 40s named Karen, listened intently as Olivia explained her situation, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I need to protect my baby," Olivia said, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. "I can't let Ryan use this against me, not when he's the one who—" She paused, swallowing hard. "Not when he's the one who betrayed us." Karen nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You're doing the right thing by documenting everything," she said. "The court will take infidelity and emotional neglect into account when deciding custody and support. We'll make sure you and your child are secure." Hearing those words gave Olivia a sliver of hope, a reminder that she wasn't as powerless as she'd felt. She left the office with a folder of legal documents and a renewed sense of determination. At home, she forced herself to act normal around Ryan. It wasn't easy. Every time she saw him glance at his phone, every time he came home late with a flimsy excuse, her chest tightened with the urge to scream, but she didn't. Instead, she smiled, asked him about his day, and pretended not to notice when he stumbled over his words. Late at night, after Ryan had fallen asleep, she would sit at her desk desk, reviewing her notes and organizing her files. The sound of his even breathing from the bedroom felt distant, almost unreal, like an echo from another life. She knew it wouldn't be long before everything came to light, before the carefully constructed world Ryan had built for himself came crashing down. But as Olivia methodically prepared her case, piece by painful piece, another story was unfolding in parallel, one Ryan thought he could keep hidden. The office was quiet after hours, the usual hum of phones and chatter replaced by the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. Emily sat at her desk, her head tilted slightly as she stared at the spreadsheet in front of her. She was the last person still working, as usual. Well, except for Ryan. He appeared in the doorway of her cubicle, leaning casually against the frame with a cup of coffee in his hand. "You're still here," he said, his voice warm and teasing. "Starting to think you might live in this office." Emily looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. "You're one to talk," she replied, nodding toward his tie, still loosely hanging around his neck. "You're here just as much as I am." He chuckled, stepping inside. "Touché," he said, setting the coffee down on her desk. "Figured you could use this. You've been staring at that screen for hours." She blinked in surprise. "Oh, thanks. That's really nice of you." "Just looking out for my favorite colleague," he said, winking. There was an ease to his tone, a charm that made it hard not to smile back. Emily had always found Ryan approachable despite his position higher up in the company. He had a way of making her feel seen, like her work actually mattered. They fell into easy conversation as they worked through the remaining tasks together. Ryan was funny, quick-witted, and attentive, asking about her goals and ideas in a way that felt genuine. Over time, their late-night collaborations became a pattern. He'd stop by her desk with coffee, crack a few jokes to lighten the mood, and stay to help her finish whatever project was on deadline. "You're too good at this," she said one evening, glancing at him as he effortlessly edited a presentation. "I don't know how you manage to juggle it all," he shrugged, his smile a little wistful. "You just find a way, I guess. It's not always easy, but when you're building something worthwhile, you make sacrifices." His words struck a chord with her. She nodded slowly, her fingers fidgeting with her pen. "I get that. Sometimes it feels like my whole life is on hold because of this job, but I don't know. I want it to mean something." Ryan looked at her, his expression softening. "It will," he said. "You've got drive, Emily. I've seen it. You're going to do amazing things." She felt her cheeks warm at his words. "Thanks, Ryan. That means a lot." As the weeks passed, Emily found herself looking forward to their late-night conversations. Ryan had a way of making her laugh, even on the most stressful days, but there were moments, small fleeting ones, that made her pause. The way his eyes lingered on her when she laughed, the subtle compliments he slipped into their conversations, the easy, natural way he leaned closer when they talked. One night, as they wrapped up yet another project, Emily finally spoke up. "Ryan," she began hesitantly, setting her pen down, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, leaning back in his chair. She hesitated, biting her lip. Us working together so much, it's starting to feel like, I don't know, like there's more to it. And I don't want to assume anything, but are you?" She faltered, her voice dropping. "I mean, are you single?" Ryan's expression shifted for a brief moment, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. But then he smiled, leaning forward slightly. "It's complicated," he said softly. "I'm in the process of getting divorced." Emily's heart sank and lifted all at once. Divorced, not married, not truly unavailable. She nodded slowly, trying to process what that meant. "I see," she said carefully. "I didn't realize. It's not something I talk about much," Ryan said, his tone earnest. "But things haven't been right for a long time. We've grown apart, you know. I've been trying to figure out the best way forward." Emily searched his face, wanting to believe him. "That must be hard," she said quietly. "I'm sorry you're going through that." He reached out, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Thanks, Emily. It's been a lot, but you've made things easier. These late nights, they're the best part of my day." Her chest tightened at his words, her heart racing. She wanted to be cautious, to guard herself, but the way he looked at her made it hard to hold on to that caution. He seemed genuine, sincere, and maybe even a little broken, someone who needed comfort as much as she did. Still, doubt lingered in the back of her mind. "Are you sure this is okay?" she asked softly. "I don't want to be part of something messy." Ryan smiled gently. "It's not messy," he assured her. "I promise I'm working on it. You don't have to worry." And with that, the doubts receded, at least for the moment. Emily let herself believe him, let herself lean into the connection that had been building between them. She told herself it was okay, that he was honest, that he wouldn't lie lie to her. She didn't know that Ryan's promises were as fleeting as the late-night quiet of the office, gone as soon as the sun rose, and the reality of his life outside those walls came rushing back. For now, all she saw was a man who seemed kind, attentive, and just as lonely as she was. And that, she thought, was enough. Ryan's behavior became increasingly bold, as though he had convinced himself that Olivia would never suspect a thing. He no longer bothered to hide his late nights or his sudden need for work trips. He walked through the house with a casual confidence that made Olivia's stomach churn. His phone buzzed constantly, the screen lighting up with messages that he never left unattended. If she walked into the room, he'd press the screen to his chest or set it face down on the counter, offering her a distracted smile. Each lie chipped away at the foundation of their marriage, but Olivia kept her mask firmly in place. She feigned ignorance, playing the role of the supportive wife, even as her heart broke a little more each day. When Ryan announced that he had to go on a work trip for the weekend, she didn't flinch, though her insides felt like they were unraveling. "Where are you headed?" she asked, folding one of his shirts and placing it neatly in his suitcase. "Just a conference upstate," he replied, checking his phone again. "Boring stuff, really." She forced a small laugh. "Well, I hope it's not all boring. Maybe you'll get a little time to relax." "Maybe," he said, tossing a tie into the suitcase without care. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, her fingers tightening around the fabric of the shirt she was holding. "Do you need anything else packed?" she asked softly. "No, this should be fine," he said, finally looking at her. "Thanks for doing this." "Of course," she said, her smile unwavering. "What are wives for?" The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but she said them anyway. She closed the suitcase with deliberate care, zipping it up as Ryan grabbed his phone and walked out of the room. Once he was gone, she sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her lap. The silence pressed in around her, heavy and suffocating. Later that night, when the house was still, Olivia found herself in the nursery. The moonlight streamed through the curtains, casting a soft glow on the partially assembled crib and the stack of baby books on the dresser. She sank into the rocking chair, her hand resting on her growing belly. Tears welled in her eyes as she thought about the life she was bringing into the world, a life that deserved so much more than this fractured reality. Her tears fell freely as she picked up a small journal from the dresser. She opened it to a blank page, the pen trembling in her hand as she began to write. "To my sweet baby," she scrawled, the ink smudging slightly where her tears touched the paper. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know one thing. I will do everything in my power to give you the life you deserve. You are my strength, my reason to keep going. I love you more than words can say." She closed the journal and held it to her chest. In the days that followed, she practiced in front of the mirror, rehearsing the words she would one day say to Ryan. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and tired, but determined. "You betrayed me," she said aloud, her voice cracking. "While I was building a life for us, you were tearing it apart." She paused, taking a shaky breath before starting again. "I loved you," she said, her eyes locking with her reflection. "But love isn't enough when there's no trust, and now it's time for me to choose myself." She clenched her fists, her reflection blurring as tears filled her eyes, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. This was her preparation, her armor for the day when she would finally confront him, and when that day came, she would be ready. The living room was filled with soft laughter and the gentle hum of conversation as Olivia moved gracefully among her guests, a practiced smile on her face. The decorations were simple but elegant, white balloons, string lights, and fresh flowers that filled the air with a subtle, sweet fragrance. It looked every bit the perfect celebration of the new life she and Ryan were supposedly preparing for. But beneath the surface, Olivia's heart pounded with the kind of anticipation that could only come from knowing this wasn't just a party. It was something much bigger. She had planned every detail meticulously, from the guest list to the timing, ensuring everyone Ryan cared about would be there. His colleagues, their closest friends, even his parents. She wanted to create the perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. Everyone thought this was a baby moon party, a cheerful send-off to the couple's final weeks before parenthood. Only Olivia knew the truth. Ryan, ever the charmer, played his role control to perfection. He floated effortlessly between conversations, shaking hands with colleagues, sharing a joke with his father-in-law, and occasionally glancing in Olivia's direction to flash what he thought was a reassuring smile. Every now and then he came over to her, placing a hand on her lower back as if to check in. "You okay?" he asked, refilling her glass with sparkling water. "I'm fine," she said, her tone calm and sweet, masking the fire burning just beneath the surface. "Everything's going perfectly." He smiled, kissed her cheek, and walked off to join a group of his co-workers. Olivia watched him go, her smile tightening as she turned back to the task at hand. She glanced at her phone, her heart skipping a beat when the screen lit up with a notification. The message was from Emily. She had arrived. Olivia straightened her posture, smoothing down the fabric of her dress. She had sent the anonymous invite 2 weeks ago, carefully crafting it to sound like something Ryan might have written. Emily, eager for what she believed was a grand romantic gesture, had taken the bait. Olivia knew Emily would come dressed to impress, and she was right. The moment Emily stepped into the room, heads turned. Emily looked stunning in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her makeup flawless, her hair styled in loose waves. She hesitated in the entryway, scanning the crowd with an expectant smile, as if she were waiting for Ryan to sweep her off her feet. Olivia approached her slowly, her expression warm and welcoming. "Hi, you must be Emily," she said, her voice smooth and polite. Emily blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting Olivia to greet her. "Oh, yes," she said, her smile faltering slightly. I'm a friend of Ryan's." "Of course," Olivia said, nodding as if she hadn't already known. "It's so lovely to meet you. Ryan's mentioned you before." Emily's eyes widened slightly, her smile returning as she tried to process the situation. "He has?" she asked, her tone cautious but curious. "Oh, absolutely," Olivia replied, gesturing toward the room. "Please, make yourself at home. This is such a special night for all of us." Emily glanced around, clearly trying to piece together why she was there and what Ryan's plan might be. Olivia left her standing there, gliding back into the crowd as if nothing was out of the ordinary. She turned her gaze toward the crowd, searching until her eyes landed on Ryan. A smile broke across her face, small at first, then growing as though she had just spotted something she'd been longing to see. She started toward him, her steps confident but with an undercurrent of hesitation. Ryan saw her before she reached him, and the transformation in his expression was instant. His face, which had been relaxed and jovial, paled as though all the color had been drained from it. His hand froze mid-gesture, the easy flow of his conversation abruptly cut short. He turned toward her as if by instinct, his eyes darting quickly around the room before he took a step forward to intercept her. "Emily," he said, his voice low, his tone a poor attempt at casual. "What are you doing here?" Emily's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes. "I got your invitation," she said softly, glancing around again. "I didn't expect you to invite me here so soon. Are you sure it's okay?" Ryan forced a laugh, his hand brushing against her elbow as he guided her slightly away from the main crowd. "Of course," he said, though his words were rushed, the faintest tremor in his voice betraying him. "Just stay discreet, okay? Discreet. Ryan, what's going on? This doesn't feel—" "Emily, please," he cut her off, his tone firmer now, though his eyes darted nervously toward Olivia, who was chatting with a group of guests across the room. "I'll explain everything later. Just trust me, okay?" Emily pressed her lips together, the warmth in her expression dimming slightly. "Fine," she said quietly. "But this isn't what I thought." Ryan nodded quickly, cutting her off again. "I'll handle it," he said, his tone sharp but hushed. "Just don't draw attention to yourself." Emily took a deep breath, nodding reluctantly as she glanced at the room around her once more. "Okay, I trust you." Ryan offered a strained smile before turning back toward the crowd, his movements stiff, his charm no longer as effortless. Emily lingered near the doorway, unsure of where to go or what to do, her confidence now shadowed by doubt. Olivia, standing with her guests, caught the brief exchange out of the corner of her eye. Her chest tightened, but her face remained calm, her smile fixed. It was almost time, but not yet. She took a sip of her water, the cool liquid soothing her dry throat, and prepared for the next move. Ryan's moment of reckoning was closer than he realized, and Olivia intended to savor every second. After dinner, the room was filled with a pleasant hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses as guests settled into their seats. Olivia stood stood slowly, smoothing her dress as she moved toward the center of the room. The soft glow of the chandelier above cast a warm light on her face, and she offered a calm, gracious smile that belied the storm raging inside her. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" she said, her voice steady but gentle. The murmur of voices quieted, and all eyes turned to her. Ryan, seated at the far end of the table, looked up with mild curiosity, his wineglass balanced lightly in his hand. Olivia caught his gaze for a brief moment before looking out at the crowd. "First of all," she began, her tone measured and warm, "I just want to thank you all for being here tonight. It means so much to Ryan and me to have our closest friends and family with us as we celebrate this new chapter of our lives." Her hand instinctively rested on her growing belly, a small gesture that felt both grounding and intentional. The guests smiled and nodded, some raising their glasses in a toast. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, a faint smirk playing on his lips, as if he were reveling in the praise by association. "Tonight is about celebrating family, the past, the present, and the future," she continued. "And as part of that, I thought it would be nice to share a little something I put together, a slideshow of memories, moments that have defined our journey." She gestured toward the screen that had been discreetly set up at the front of the room. The lights dimmed slightly, and the first image appeared on the screen, a photo of Olivia and Ryan on their wedding day, laughing as they danced under a canopy of fairy lights. There were murmurs of appreciation and smiles from the crowd as the slideshow continued, moving through milestones, their honeymoon, birthdays, vacations, and candid moments at home. Ryan's shoulders seemed to relax further as he watched, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. But then, halfway through, the tone shifted. The next image wasn't of happy memories or cherished moments. It was a photo of Ryan and Emily seated at a dimly lit table in a cozy restaurant, his hand resting lightly over hers. The room fell silent. The image lingered for a moment before transitioning to another, this time a screenshot of a text exchange. The affectionate words between Ryan and Emily, unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the crowd, low murmurs breaking the silence as the slideshow continued. Photos of Ryan and Emily at intimate dinners, receipts for extravagant gifts, and more incriminating evidence appeared one after another, each one more damning than the last. Olivia stood at the center of it all, her expression calm but unyielding, her gaze fixed on Ryan. Ryan, frozen in his seat, gripped his wineglass so tightly it looked like it might shatter. His face drained of color as the realization of what was happening washed over him. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. The room seemed to close in around him, the whispers and stares of the guests like daggers. Olivia waited until the final image faded from the screen before she spoke, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. "Ryan, while I was carrying our child and building a home for our family, you were busy building lives with someone else." Ryan's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide and desperate. "Olivia, Don't," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare insult me by pretending there's an explanation for this." Emily, who had been sitting near the back of the room, now looked utterly mortified. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she stared at Ryan. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What is she talking about? You said you were separated." Olivia turned toward Emily, her expression sharp and unflinching. "Separated?" she said, her voice laced with cold incredulity. "Funny, that's news to me, and to the baby we're expecting together." Emily's eyes widened in horror as the weight of Olivia's words sank in. "You lied to me," her voice barely audible, her gaze locked on Ryan. "You told me." "I can explain," Ryan stammered, his voice breaking as he looked between Olivia and Emily. This isn't what it looks like." "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," Olivia said, her voice rising slightly, though her tone remained steady. "You lied to her, you lied to me, and now everyone here knows exactly who you are." The guests, once warm and smiling, now looked at Ryan with a mixture of shock and disdain. His parents exchanged mortified glances, his colleagues whispered among themselves, and Olivia's family watched in stunned silence. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she turned to address the crowd once more. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, her voice calm and composed, despite the storm within her. "I think it's safe to say this evening has been enlightening." With that, she stepped away, her head held high, leaving Ryan to face the weight of his own betrayal. The room was thick with tension, the kind that made every breath feel heavier. Ryan stood at the center of it all, his face pale, his eyes darting from one horrified expression to another. The charm he usually wore like armor had cracked, leaving only panic and desperation in its place. "It was a mistake," Ryan blurted, his words tumbling over each other. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just got caught up in things, and it doesn't mean anything." Olivia didn't flinch. She stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking softly against the floor, and held out a sleek manila folder. Ryan's eyes flicked to it nervously, as if it might bite. "This isn't just a mistake, Ryan. It's a pattern, and I'm done pretending it's not." Her hand didn't waver as she thrust the folder toward him. "Inside are the divorce papers. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You've made your choices, Ryan. Now I'm making mine, for me and for our baby." Ryan hesitated, his hand hovering over the folder like it was laced with poison. "Olivia, please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You don't have to do this. We can fix this. I can fix this. You just have to let me." "Fix it?" Olivia repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You don't even know what that means. If you had cared about fixing anything, we wouldn't be here. But you didn't care, Ryan, not about me, not about our family. You cared about yourself." The crowd, now captivated by the unfolding drama, was silent. Emily, who had been standing frozen by the door, finally found her voice. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at Ryan, her expression a mix of heartbreak and anger. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling. "You told me you were separated. You said you wanted a future with me." Ryan spun toward her, his desperation shifting. "Emily, he started, but she cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. "Don't," she snapped, her voice rising. "Don't you dare try to explain this to me. I trusted you, Ryan. I gave you everything, and this is what I get, to find out like this in front of everyone?" She turned back toward the door, her heels clicking angrily against the floor as she stormed out. Just before she left, she threw one last glance over her shoulder, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "You're nothing but a liar. I hope it was worth it." The door slammed behind her, the sound reverberating through the room like a final punctuation mark on Ryan's humiliation. He stood there, frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and shame. His colleagues exchanged awkward glances, his parents looked mortified, and Olivia's friends offered her subtle nods of support. Ryan turned back to Olivia, his voice barely above a whisper. "Liv, please, don't do this. I love you." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment there was a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps the ghost of the love they once shared, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. She straightened her posture, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. "No, Ryan, you don't love me. If you did, we wouldn't be here. You loved the idea of me, of us, but I won't let you drag me down anymore. I deserve better. Our baby deserves better." With that, Olivia turned and walked away, leaving Ryan standing alone, his world crumbling around him. The whispers grew louder, the judgment palpable as the crowd began to disperse. Olivia didn't look back. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt free. Her steps were steady, her resolve unshakable. This was her beginning, and she wasn't going to let Ryan's betrayal define her story. Not anymore. The courtroom was eerily quiet, the air heavy with tension. Ryan sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his jaw clenched as his high-profile attorney whispered something in his ear. He nodded stiffly, though he wasn't really listening. His gaze kept darting toward Olivia, who sat across the room at her own table, her expression calm but resolute. She avoided his eyes, her focus entirely on the folder of documents her lawyer was organizing. The proceedings had dragged on for weeks, each day feeling like an eternity for both of them. Ryan had come in with confidence at first, convinced that his attorney's reputation and his own carefully crafted image would be enough to sway the court. He had told himself he was doing this for his child, that he deserved a chance to be part of their life. But as the evidence Olivia's lawyer presented began to pile up, that confidence crumbled. Photos, text messages, financial records. Olivia's lawyer painted a damning picture of Ryan's infidelity and emotional neglect, weaving a narrative that left little room for rebuttal. Each piece of evidence was like a stone dropped into the still water of Ryan's defense, creating ripples that he couldn't control. "Your Honor," Olivia's lawyer said, her voice clear and steady, "the evidence speaks for itself. My client has dedicated herself to creating a stable, loving environment environment for her child. Mr. Morgan, on the other hand, has shown a pattern of behavior that demonstrates a lack of commitment and accountability. It is in the best interest of the child to award primary custody to Mrs. Morgan. Ryan's attorney tried to counter, arguing that his client was remorseful and ready to be a devoted father. Mr. Morgan acknowledges his mistakes, she said, her tone persuasive, and he is committed to making amends. He deserves the opportunity to share custody and to be an active part of his child's life. But the judge's expression remained impartial, her gaze flicking between the two parties as she considered the argument. When the moment finally came for her to deliver her verdict, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. After reviewing the evidence and considering the testimonies, the judge began, her voice firm but measured. I find that it is in the best interest of the child to award primary custody to Mrs. Morgan. Mr. Morgan will be granted limited visitation rights, supervised if necessary, and is ordered to pay child support to ensure the well-being of the child. Ryan's stomach dropped as the words sank in. He felt a surge of anger, frustration, but most of all, shame. He looked toward Olivia, hoping to catch her eye, to find some hint of the woman who once believed in him. But she didn't look his way. She was already gathering her things, her lawyer leaning over to whisper something in her ear that made her nod quietly. As the courtroom emptied, Ryan sat frozen in his seat. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a few words of consolation, but he barely heard them. His thoughts were a blur, fragments of regret and guilt swirling together as he tried to process what had just happened. Later that evening, Ryan found himself sitting alone in the house that had once been filled with life. The silence was deafening. The furniture seemed colder, emptier, stripped of the warmth Olivia had once brought to the space. On the coffee table sat an ultrasound photo she had left behind, the one he'd barely paid attention to before. He picked it up now, his fingers trembling as he traced the edges. For the first time, he truly looked at it, the tiny form that was supposed to be their future, their family. Tears blurred his vision as he thought about all the moments he'd already missed and all the ones he would never have. The first steps, the first words, the little milestones that he had taken for granted when he still had a chance to be there. He glanced around the room, his gaze landing on the picture frames Olivia hadn't taken with her. Their wedding photos stared back at him, the joy on her face a cruel reminder of what he'd thrown away. The friends who used to fill this house with laughter had grown distant, their calls and invitations slowly fading after the truth came out. Even his parents had expressed their disappointment, their disapproval, evident in the cold tone of their last conversation. Ryan sank deeper into the couch, the weight of his choices pressing down on him like a physical burden. He thought about the man he used to be, the promises he'd made to Olivia, the dreams they'd shared, and then he thought about the man he had become, selfish, careless, blind to what truly mattered. For the first time, he saw the full cost of his actions, the family he had lost, the love he had destroyed, the life he had thrown away. And as he sat there, the ultrasound photo clutched tightly in his hand, the tears finally came, a bitter torrent of regret and realization. In the stillness of that empty house, Ryan was left with nothing but the echoes of what could have been and the knowledge that he had no one to blame but himself. Olivia didn't delay a second to move forward. The small house was filled with the soft hum of new beginnings. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dancing on freshly painted walls, and the delicate patterns of baby blankets draped over a crib. Olivia stood in the living room, her hands on her hips, surveying the boxes still waiting to be unpacked. She smiled to herself, a quiet, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep inside. This was hers, all of it, a home she had chosen, built with love and purpose for her and her baby. The past few months had been a whirlwind. Moving into this house felt like a turning point, a step toward a life she had reclaimed as her own. She unpacked a box marked nursery, pulling out soft pastel decorations and tiny onesies that made her heart swell. Carefully, she arranged them in the drawers she had assembled late one night with a friend, the two of them laughing as they tried to make sense of the instructions. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Sarah, an old college friend she'd recently reconnected with. Lunch tomorrow, my treat. Can't wait to see you. Olivia smiled as she typed back, wouldn't miss it. See you then. It felt good to be reconnecting with the people who mattered, the ones who had always seen her for who she truly was. was. The baby's room was coming together beautifully, the soft tones of lavender and cream creating a calm, cozy space. As she hung a framed print above the crib, her hand rested on her belly, now round and full of life. She spoke softly, almost a whisper, as if her baby could already hear her. "We're going to be just fine," she said. "Better than fine, you'll see." Weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Then one crisp morning, her baby arrived. The labor was long and exhausting, but the moment she held her daughter in her arms, everything else faded. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she looked into the tiny, perfect features of her newborn. "Hi there," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's just us now, kiddo, and we're going to do great." Back home, the early days were a mix of sleepless nights and quiet joy. Olivia rocked her daughter in the nursery, the soft glow of a nightlight illuminating the room. The baby cooed in her arms, her little fingers wrapping tightly around Olivia's. She kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the sweet scent of new life. One morning, Olivia stood by the window, holding her baby, as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon. The warmth of the light kissed her skin, and she closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had been through so much: heartbreak, betrayal, uncertainty, but here she was, standing strong, holding her future in her arms. Her days became fuller, richer. She started working part-time for a local gallery, helping curate exhibits while balancing the joys and challenges of motherhood. It wasn't the grand career she had once envisioned, but it was meaningful, and it gave her a sense of purpose. The gallery director had already hinted at a bigger role in the future, and Olivia felt the quiet thrill of possibility. Friends began to fill her life again, too. Sarah stopped by often, bringing coffee and lending a hand when Olivia needed a break. They'd sit in the living room laughing and reminiscing while Olivia's daughter dozed peacefully nearby. It felt like Olivia's world, once shattered, was slowly coming back together, piece by piece. Late one night, Olivia sat at her desk, her baby asleep in the crib beside her. She opened her journal, the same one she had written in months ago when everything felt hopeless. This time, her words were different. "Betrayal doesn't define us," she wrote. "It breaks us, yes, but it also gives us a choice to stay broken or to rise. I chose to rise, for myself, for my daughter, for the life we deserve, and I've learned that strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from getting back up again and again." She closed the journal and looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with love. "We did it," she whispered. "We're free." The story ends with Olivia, but her journey doesn't. It's just beginning, filled with new challenges, joys, and moments of quiet triumph. She chose to rise, and in doing so, she found herself again. What would you do in Olivia's shoes? Would you choose to rise above betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and redemption.